On July 22nd, 2024, Senators Joe Manchin, Independent of West Virginia, and John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, Chairman and Ranking Member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, released the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024. The committee voted 15-4 in favor of this bill, with both support and opposition coming from both sides of the aisle. The difficulties of permitting electricity transmission lines is something that's come up repeatedly in this channel, and this bill has much to like in that arena. From the American Clean Power one-pager supporting this bill, we see that on average, getting a permit took 4.5 years for an energy project and 7.5 years for a transmission project. And long-distance transmission projects have taken up to 20 years just to get the permit. There have been some incremental improvements like FERC Order 1920, but not nearly enough. But there's a lot in here that locks in decades of fossil fuel production and weakens environmental protections. A group of over 360 environmental and climate organizations submitted a letter detailing the reasons to oppose the bill. Their letter begins, "This legislation guts bedrock environmental protections, endangers public health, opens up tens of millions of acres of public lands and hundreds of millions of acres of offshore waters to further oil and gas leasing, gives public lands to mining companies, and would de facto rubber stamp gas export projects that harm frontline communities and perpetuate the climate crisis." The authors are not exactly climate warriors. Joe Manchin isn't in the pocket of fossil fuel interests. He actually is a fossil fuel interest. And he has used his power as governor of West Virginia and a U.S. senator to help his company, including getting waste coal, which his company buys and sells, listed as a clean energy source. The League of Conservation Voters give Manchin a lifetime score of 55%, which is the lowest of any Democrat or independent in the Senate. John Barrasso has received over $1.8 million in campaign contributions from the oil and gas industry over his Senate career, even more than the $1.4 million that Joe Manchin has received. He finally acknowledged that climate change is real in 2021. Barrasso's lifetime score with the League of Conservation Voters is a miserable 7%, below Mitch McConnell's 9% score. So we can start with the fact that this bill was not written by environmental heroes, but by people with the interests of the fossil fuel industry front and center. It is not intended to be a bill that reduces climate pollution. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean we need to consider the entire bill and decide if the shit sandwich we're being served has enough tasty and healthy stuff to overcome the flavor of excrement. One focus is speeding judicial review, the process of a court reviewing the actions of the executive branch as part of a lawsuit, typically brought by an affected community or an environmental organization. This impacts both renewable and fossil fuel projects. They propose that to challenge a permit, you need to file your lawsuit within 5 months rather than 6 years, which is the current limit. One of the criticisms of this bill is that the new deadline is too short and there are no strong notification requirements. So it's possible that the period would pass before an affected community would even be aware of the granting of a permit. The bill also requires federal agencies to respond to issues within 6 months. Currently, there are no deadlines to act, and it's not clear that this is even feasible. From a climate perspective, there should be no leasing on federal land of any fossil fuels. 0. Anything greater than 0 is a problem. Not only does this bill allow continued leasing, it requires that land be offered for oil and gas leases, or the Department of Interior is prohibited from approving wind and solar development on federal land. This is to prevent the Department of Interior showing favor of one class of resources, renewables, over another class, fossil fuels. This is laughable. Even if the bill passes, fossil fuels will have many advantages. For instance, though this bill will make it easier to permit a transmission line, it will still be harder than a gas or oil pipeline. This reminds me of the saying, when you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression. Also, we should favor renewables over fossil fuels for lots of reasons: climate, sustainability, air quality, water quality. Section 203 removes the requirement for a federal permit even if 49% of the oil and gas being produced is under federal land. A state or tribal permit would still be required, but its protections might be significantly weaker. The bill also requires sales of at least 60 million acres per year of offshore oil and gas leases in the Gulf of Mexico. By comparison, the bill requires leases for offshore wind of only 400,000 acres. Remember what I said about privilege? It's hard to confirm, but the leasing section seems like it was written by the oil and gas industry with no input from anyone else. The establishment of the Abandoned Hard Rock Mine Fund is interesting. According to Section 210B, all of the claimed maintenance fees collected will go into cleaning up the mess left behind from the mining industry. My thinking is the U.S. citizens own a resource and should be paid for it, and the mining companies should be required to clean up their mess. And abandoning a mine should be a criminal offense. If the mining companies can't make a profit after paying the owners of the resource, that is, the citizens of the U.S., and cleaning up their mess, then they shouldn't build the mine in the first place. This section reverses President Biden's pause on permitting LNG terminals, which I did an entire video, so I won't go into detail on why that is bad, but may be irrelevant since we've already permitted so many LNG terminals. There's a worrisome provision that if the government misses a deadline in reviewing a permit application, then it's granted. That seems backwards to me, that if not approved, then it's not approved. Since the U.S. is already the world's largest LNG exporter, the argument that if we don't sell LNG, someone else will doesn't make sense. So this section is at best worthless, and at worst makes it possible for the U.S. to flood the world market with a powerful greenhouse gas. In no way is it an improvement. There's much to love here, which is why groups like the American Clean Power Association and the Solar Energy Industries Association support this bill. This bill would definitely be an improvement over the situation today. For instance, this bill removes the requirement for the Department of Energy to designate an area as a national interest electricity corridor before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, can be a backstop to granting permits when a state doesn't act or refuses to grant a permit, as long as the transmission line would significantly reduce transmission congestion in interstate commerce, protect or benefit consumers, and provide improved reliability. This bill would improve interregional transmission planning that I talked about in this video. And I could go on. I didn't see anything in the transmission section that wouldn't make things better. Some of these reforms have already been enacted by FERC, but passing this bill into law would reduce the odds that FERC reforms would be thrown out by a court. What this bill doesn't do is direct a federal agency with responsibility and authority to build a national transmission network akin to the federal highway system. All it does is make it easier for the current players to build transmission lines. This is definitely a good step, but I suspect that 20 years down the road, we'd find we still don't have the grid we need, but we will have a grid that's better than it would have been if Congress does nothing. We need to double the rate at which we're building out our grid, and I'm guessing the reforms in this bill would get us about halfway there. The authors of this bill did not intend for it to be a climate bill. This bill is an all-of-the-above approach to energy. It will speed development of oil, gas, wind, solar, and even geothermal. Pretty much everything other than nuclear, which is out of scope of the bill. But we're in a climate emergency, and easing the development of oil and gas is like selling scrap metal to the Japanese. in 1942. Ideally, we shouldn't stop fossil fuel explorations by making it difficult to get a permit, but by imposing a cost on carbon emissions so that burning fossil fuels is not economically attractive. But since the U.S. does not have a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade scheme or any cost on carbon, these permitting barriers are often used to slow the development of fossil fuels, which is a good thing. And looking beyond the climate implications, the permitting process is there to mitigate the inherently damaging impacts of resource extraction. While the goals of this bill should be to streamline the process, they go too far and actually remove important protections. This bill is supported by every energy industry group I could think of, including those focused on transmission, wind, and solar. On the other hand, it's opposed by over 360 climate and environmental organizations. Let that sink in for a moment, that renewable energy developers like the bill, but climate activists don't. Why is that? Do you know the poem, The Blind Man and the Elephant? It starts, "It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, 'God bless me, but the elephant is nothing but a wall.' The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, 'Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear.'" And so it goes, each feeling one aspect of the elephant and making their decision based on that. So the renewable energy industry folks correctly see that this bill will make it easier to build wind farms and long-distance transmission lines. And the climate activists correctly see that this will lead to increased fossil fuel production and weakened environmental standards. The activists are trying to keep us from cooking the planet to the point where it's better suited for dinosaurs than humans. Renewable energy is a tool in that battle, but so is transitioning off of fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry is so powerful in Congress, they're able to block reasonable permitting reforms like the Clean Energy and Transmission Act in the House that has similar changes to the process of building transmission lines without locking in leasing of federal lands for the oil and gas exploration. I'm unaware of any detailed analysis of the impacts of this bill, but if you are, please share them. So while I believe in compromise and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, this bill seems too heavily weighted towards increasing the extraction and burning of fossil fuels. In the absence of a cost on carbon, this is not a compromise I'm willing to support. And to answer the question in the title, they created a bill that helps build out the renewable side, but at the same time will lead to increased fossil fuel production. So it doesn't enable the transition if it only enables one half. You think I got something wrong? Please let me know in the comments. And if you learned something, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to support my work, you can buy me a beverage. And please share this video with anyone you know who has been frustrated with red tape.